Welcome to the MAM Journals. As most of you have been kind enough to follow the channel for some time, you'll know that the majority of my bike reviews are on Suzuki's, Royal Enfields, courtesy of King's Two-Wheel Centre. I also get access to BMWs from North Oxford Garage, and friends are kind enough to lend me either their classics or other bikes. I don't think I've actually reviewed a new or nearly new Yamaha, and when this bike came into King's as part exchange on a Hayabusa, I quietly asked would he mind if I borrowed it and took it away for a few days, and as always they're very generous and said why not, have fun. Now this bike is the Yamaha Tracer GT9 Plus. Now it's their middleweight sports tourer, and its natural comparisons would be bikes like the KTM 890 and maybe the BMW XR 900. But at £15,000, it's also getting itself into territories where it competes against bikes like Kawasaki's 1000 Ninja SX, the two Suzukis, the GT1000 and the GX1000, their crossover bike, and possibly even the BMW XR 1000. So it's certainly in a very busy part of the market. I film bikes which I have access to for long enough to make what I consider to be a proper review, but I follow all bikes, and I'm a subscriber to Bike Magazine. So part of my preparation for this, I thought, well, I wonder what Bike Magazine make of this bike, and I was interested to hear their assessment. They describe the bike as the defining mid-size upright sports tourer, not the cheapest but easily the best, fabulous, 10 out of 10. Well, I don't think I'll give it anything 10 out of 10, so naturally I was looking forward to riding it. How we're going to cover it today is our usual way. We'll go through the specifications of the bike, we'll go out for a ride, and then we'll come back and I'll give you my personal conclusions and see if it is the perfect 10. Okay, so let's have a walk around the bike and I'll go through the specifications. Okay, so looking at the engine, this is an 890cc, it's liquid cooled, it's a 4-stroke triple. It's easy with engine configurations to sort of jump into generalisations and stereotypes, and I think you've got to be careful nowadays. Engineers are pretty clever and they can get lots of different power characteristics out of different configurations such as this. This particular engine is, well, they used to make two of them really, a slightly detuned version, but this has now actually been upgraded to their sort of full fat version of this 890cc. It produces 119 PS at 10,000 revs and 93 newton meters of torque at 7. The bike, as you can see, is fitted with a quick shifter. This is a 6-speed gearbox, and it's recently been upgraded, the gearbox, to make it a bit more usable. It's I say in the riding section, it's okay, which sort of is a bit muted really. It's a good gearbox. It's not the best gearbox out there, but it certainly functions well. Right, the bike weighs 223 kilograms wet, and that's actually quite light compared to other midweights in the category. Seat height, this one's a little bit difficult to do. The standard range, according to the internet, is 810 to 825, but actually in the handbook it says you can go 810 to 835. Now this one is slightly unusual because it's had some modifications done on it, and I think the suspension link, it's difficult to see, but this bar down there, I think this may have been attempted to lowered by putting that in, and they've also dropped the yokes down or raised the forks, which drops the bike down and changes the geometry. I'll go through the geometry dimensions in a second, but in terms of what that seat height is, I'm guessing that's somewhere between the two numbers we've just talked about, but I'll talk more about that when we actually go out for a ride. The wheelbase on the bike is 1500 millimeters, 1.5 meters, and that's contact point to contact point. Obviously I've got this up in the air on the main stand at the moment, and if we go towards the front, the factory specifications for the rake of the bike, i.e. the steering head angle down here, is 25 degrees, but clearly if you change the way the forks are in there and you push the forks further up, then that will actually reduce the rake further and in theory quicken it. This is fitted with telescopics. That's got 130 millimeters of travel on the front there, and if we go to the back, then that's obviously, you can see the shock unit in there. It's a laid down shock unit, and that travel is 137. So those numbers in comparison to other bikes, an adventure style bike, you know, would normally have more than 150. So while the styling looks a bit like an adventure bike, it's a sports tourer bike that just happens to be styled to enable this easy open riding space. The suspension on the bike is electronic, and it's doing a lot of its adjustments itself, or by pressing through buttons and getting preload. This is the preload adjuster on it, and which is nice that you've actually got that, which is great when you're changing whether you've got passengers or not. And this is set more towards the H when I've actually sort of manipulated it round, which is an unusual thing to find with it if it's been lowered. But again, probably making this more complicated than it needs to be. In terms of brakes, at the rear here, it's fitted with a 245 millimeter disc and this single caliper, and at the front it's got these radial units here, and these are 298 dual discs. Interestingly, it's got radial up at the master cylinder up here as well. Again, if you look through in there, you can see that it's actually going that way as opposed to from the side, which tells you it's a complete set of radial brake systems. In terms of how they are on the road, and I don't mention them when we go for a ride, they're okay. You'd think that with radial both ends that actually the brakes would be sort of very sports bike sharp. They're not. They're probably slightly sharper than the brakes on some other bikes configured in a similar way, but they're not really sharp. If you wanted to actually sort of sharpen them up with that sort of level of equipment on it, changing the pads would undoubtedly make him a little sharper to react. Okay, so this is the Tracer 9 GT Plus, and it is a very well equipped bike. It's got heated grips, it's got radar, cruise control. I'll talk a bit about that both when we go out and in a moment. It comes with panniers for its full touring capability, and it's fitted with a main stand, which is, I think it's always nice for a chain driven bike when you're out and about on touring. Makes it easier to adjust. The bike is fitted with a new dash. For previous models had a slightly unusual split screen arrangement, which wasn't universally popular. Okay, so if you can see, when I actually measure the dimensions of it, it's 10 inches total in dimensions, and then the bit where it's sort of highlighted the screen, it's 7 in that way. So they're really talking about this bit in here, not the overall dimensions. The actual bit there, of course, the main bit of your attention, is significantly smaller than the overall 7-inch screen. Okay, so I want to go through some of the options available in terms of how you can adjust things. I won't go too complicated, and I'll focus on just a few things, if I may. The mode is obviously your power mode. You've got rain, street, sport, and custom, where you can individualize the settings. How you get into the controls of the settings are, if you go press the toggle button in, you get to machine settings, press that in again, you get this menu in front. You can see the various options you've got there, including the grip warmers as they call them, and indeed all of your other sort of functions with it. But this is probably the one we really want to look at to demonstrate the level of control that you've got. Like most bikes, you have, when you put it into the various modes, rain, sport, whatever, it's already predetermined in there how much control it's giving you or otherwise. And if I just cursor along, you can see power delivery mode, how quickly you want the power to come in, the traction control systems being adjusted, the slide control. It works with a 6-axis IMU, which is increasingly common on bikes, and I think a good thing. Lift control system, and the suspension settings, where you have 2 options in terms of how you're setting up the base electronics. You've also got control over your quick shifter, which we talked about, whether you want it to work up, down or off. And you've got a braking control system as well. This brake control system, now because this is fitted, and we're going to cover that a little more fully in a moment with this cruise control, they have a braking system where it can be linked, i.e. it's pulling the front lever will also apply the rear brake as well, and you activate that system or can turn it off by these controls. The reason why they want that is obviously when the radar cruise control is operating, they want the brakes to be able to operate smoothly by electronically adjusting or applying both of them. So quite a lot of sophistication on the systems and a lot of individual adjustability available. This custom one, obviously you can then drop in whatever level of traction control and various other assistance you require for your own personal riding style. You can see underneath you've got this sort of rolling cursor bar which you use with the toggle switch, and you can move it around and adjust it. And that's where you get all your connectivity to your apps if you want to do it, and information generally. This one, theme, is quite interesting, and again I'll explore that when we go for a ride, but this is about altering the graphics that you've got in front of you on the display. Simply by pressing the toggle up or down, you can change what you're seeing. I'll express an opinion on that when we go out for a ride. So I'm now backing out of that, and you can see the toggle switch is now operating these cursoring through the various information on here. There's a lot of information on this dash, and some will enjoy it, some find it perhaps less helpful. We're all individual. Hopefully I've given you a reasonable overview of the sort of adjustability available on the systems, but of course the proof is in the pudding. So let's go for a ride and see how I found it. Having spent a few hours familiarising myself with the bike on the day before, I set off on a 130-mile trip combining town, dual carriageways, a short bump test and some open A roads. In town, the bike feels light to ride and the seat height is manageable. As discussed, I'm not entirely clear what has been done on this particular bike, but at 1.72 metres tall and with a 29.5-inch inside leg, I found it fine. Well, fine as long as I remember to raise my leg over the slightly higher passenger seat when getting on. I had good foot contact either side, and I suspect the actual height of this bike is somewhere between the 810 and 825 millimetres options which are available as standard. The quick shifter gearbox needs about 2000 revs to function, and I tried it in both sports and street mode in town and whilst out and about. It works well. The clutch biting point on this particular bike was quite a long way out, and I did get a bit of judder from it as I pulled away from lights and from junctions. I did get more used to it and smoother over time, but
this bike was definitely not as smooth as some other bikes that I have ridden in that regard. These upright adventure style riding positions are good at slow speeds, and the Yamaha was no exception. The bike certainly passed the town riding element comfortably. Looking for a dual carriageway, I made my way up the slip road. If the bike was comfortable in town, it was definitely happy, lengthening its stride. This is a sports-tourer. The bike is fitted with radar-assisted cruise control, which, reading the manual, you need to be an astronaut to operate. But in reality, it was easy. The system is controlled via a handlebar cluster on the left-hand side. Usual options. This one activates with a middle button, it sets with the bottom one, and increases or resumes with the top one. Slightly unusually, the switch most of us associate with flashing your lights sets the distance you want the radar to stay behind the vehicle in front. Selecting a vehicle I knew I would catch up with at 70 miles an hour, I pressed the buttons and thought, let's see what happens. It does, of course, work. Slowing down is required without any input from me. Having tested the party trick, I accelerated past and then asked the system to resume. It works perfectly well. So, would I use it? Well, I definitely use cruise control on my sports tourer and my GS, and another set of electronic eyes certainly won't hurt. I didn't test it in anger though. I think it'd be interesting to see how smoothly the brakes are applied when approaching at significantly higher speed. Should have tried it really, but definitely not one for a video. The bike is comfortable on dual carriageways and is pulling a relaxed 4,500 revs at 70 miles an hour, with a large screen keeping most of the wind off you. There was some wind noise, which I actually get with my RI helmet on all my bikes, so possibly as much about that as the screen. I did not feel any buffeting. Those seeking splendid isolation might want to try the various screen extensions available to see if it works better for you. The road I normally use to bump test the bikes, never in great shape, has been badly damaged by the winter weather. The first part of it is in better condition than the latter part, and accelerating over it, the 130 and 137 millimeters of travel on this Yamaha with electronic suspension cope with it easily. The latter part requires significantly more caution, particularly if you need to use near the badly damaged edges. As a friend recently commented to me, if Britain does get invaded again, I hope it's the Romans. At least we'll get the roads fixed. Personally, I hope at some point we'll get round to fixing them ourselves. The dash has more graphic options than a teenager's games console. Fun, but not always useful. For me, the most important things I want to know is how fast am I going, what revs am I using, and what gear am I in. Other stuff I can find at my leisure, or investigate if a warning light appears. It is a clear and bright screen, clearer than it looks on the video, but for me it felt busy to my eye. Too much of the 7-inch TFT is used on things that I don't need to see very often. Initially, I was unsure about the new toggle stick and made several attempts to indicate with it, unsuccessfully of course. But after becoming familiar with its position and function, I did like it. I used it to change the graphics and controlled the heated grips as I rode along, and if I rode one of these regularly and connected to the various apps and functions available, I am sure I would like it even more. I think that is a neat system. Before making any comments on the handling of the bike, I think it's only right that I point out again that this bike is not set up in the way that Yamaha designed it. The forks are raised in the clamps, something's been done at the rear, and it is not factory spec. So please bear that in mind when I make the next comments. Having said that, I actually found the handling to be okay to good. I am not a particularly fast rider and don't take liberties with bikes I'm not familiar with on public roads. I found the bike changed direction nicely and felt balanced and secure. It was a little harsh at the front and hammered slightly over rippled surfaces, and again, talking about the front end, it was a little light and detached at, let's call it, brisker speeds, more so than the other sports tourers I've tried. Whether both of these issues could be dialed out by suspension and geometry adjustments or a return to a factory setup is something I don't currently know. If I have a chance to ride a standard bike, I will certainly take it. The thing I really liked about this bike was the engine. This 890cc 3-cylinder has excellent usable power between 5,500 and 10,000 revs. It's perfect for real-world overtaking. It is not the most powerful sports tourer out there. At 119 PS, PS stands for Förderstärke, which is German for horse strength. On paper, it is quite a way behind the Suzuki GT and GX offerings and Kawasaki's Ninja SX. BMW's S1000XR, with approaching 170 horsepower, is a projectile with panniers. All of these bikes are 4-cylinder, they're bigger capacity machines and they're heavier. Pinned, there is little doubt they would see the Yamaha off, but personally I'm not too sure how many opportunities there are to use such performance on the road. But in fairness, that's coming from someone who's bought an M1000R with 208 brake horsepower last year, so I can understand the attraction of horsepower. The beauty of this Yamaha is that it delivers what power it has very willingly. You don't have to dance on the gearbox and reach for revs to find it. I was significantly more impressed than, by looking at the spec sheets, I thought I would be. I really enjoyed riding this bike. Although some of the features are not to my personal taste, it is overall a very impressive package. I've actually booked a track day at Donington with the Yamaha Experience team. I've enjoyed 4 or 5 days with them in the last 2 years, riding both the R7 and the R6. This time I've been lucky enough to book the XSR 900 GP. Riding this Tracer with the same engine has reminded me just how much I'm looking forward to it.
So, how did I get on? Well, firstly, I would again like to express my thanks to King's Two Wheel Centre for lending me the bike for a few days for me to experience it. It's a very capable bike, and it's got good adjustability, it's got lots of electronics, it's a sporty bike that you could tour on, so it's got great versatility. I think as I mentioned when we went for a ride, I have some reservations about the handling, but I think that's probably to do with adjustment as opposed to the core specifications and design of the bike. So, do I agree with Bike Magazine's 10 out of 10? Well, I'm not sure I've given anything a 10 out of 10. I do think it's a good bike, but for me personally, possibly down to aesthetics and a few things which weren't quite to my personal taste, I'd give it an 8, which is quite a high rating under my system in terms of assessing bikes' capabilities. I think if you're in the sports tourer market, this bike is worth a ride and see if it's the one for you. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and I hope that you found it useful. If you have, you might be kind enough to press like or even consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so. But as is always the case, what is most important is that you ride safe and you stay well.